from that, we set up an action plan, and then I met again with them in March, April, in that time frame, with a projection of our action plans going through the summer. So, next. The walkthrough, for those who are not familiar, is completed prior to doing the TFI meeting with the school. A good thing to have an outside person do it. Kind of gives that fresh eyes approach to the schools. So I had an external person do that, so that is what I did. To do this, I sent out 18 different emails contacting the administrator and the coaches at each building, letting them know that I'll be coming. I typically give a time frame. For example, tomorrow I have 2 of them, so I just let one building know I'll be there around 9:30, 10, and the other one around 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just to let them know that I'm coming through. They don't need to do anything, meet or greet with me or anything like that. If the staff in the schools are unfamiliar with you, make sure that they are given a heads up. When I first started doing some of this, one of the staff wasn't familiar with me, and they were quite hesitant to talk to me. Wasn't really sure what was going on, but once they figured out who I was, things went much smoothly. So just make sure people know you're coming.
Man, I thought everyone knew you, Dave.
I do now, but all right, next. For those people who are not sure where you can find the walkthrough tool, it's found on page 28 of the TFI PDF. The last session we had, we will kind of walk through where you can find that PDF piece. It's just page 28. I print off 1 page for each school, just that page. And then I do the walkthroughs typically take 1.5 hours to 2 hours, depending on how quickly I have to find kids. I try to get there either during a morning recess time or lunchtime. Lunchtime is a great time. Kids really like coming up, and especially the elementary ones really like taking that quiz. So you can get a lot of kids really quickly at that time, and that way you're not disrupting classes. Just a quick note, if you're not overly familiar with the buildings, make note of the overall visibility of the PBIS. It's part of the rubric, but it's not something that's on the walkthrough form. So just kind of make notes if are you seeing those area-specific ones for the cafeteria, the hallway, etc. So just so you have that piece available to you when you go through the TFI rubric. All right. Essentially, the walkthrough consists of the 2 pieces. One is that staff survey. This is 10% or 5 staff members. You ask them what the school-wide expectations are. Have you taught those expectations? And have you given out any of those acknowledgement pieces? I gave a little what the expectation is underneath those, so that's what those little star pieces are. So they want to make sure 90% can do the 67% of all expectations and acknowledgments by 90% of the staff.
For most schools, they have 3 expectations, so that basically means that the staff has to be able to do 2 out of the 3, which you'd think would be easy, but isn't always.
They sometimes struggle getting everything going. Next, the student survey. The guideline is at least 10 students. I typically try to get 15. One school, like I said, I got there at lunchtime, and I had 41 students do the whole what are the school-wide expectations, and that's 70% of students can give you 60%. And then they want at least 50% of the students getting acknowledgement in the past 2 months. And those are just real quick questions. And I've been doing follow-up questions with the students of why did you get the Panther Paw or whatever they're calling them, just so to see if they're understanding why they're getting acknowledged. Some are like, well, I was being respectful, and one student told me that, what was it? I got it for giving attentive listening. So he obviously knew why he was getting his Panther Paw. So, all right, next. Meeting setup. after I did the walkthrough, I set up meetings with each of my schools, and that would be done through an email. The administrator obviously invited Tier 1 and Tier 2 coaches, any other key PBIS people that they may want, and myself was there. No meet. I always scheduled for 1 hour, none went over an hour. Some were very, very close, but none went over that 1 hour time period. All right.
Can we stay on that one for a little bit? Can you go back to that one? And I'm just going to interject that there are some schools that, especially if they have different teams, may want to, they don't get everyone together, they do them separately, and they have one paper form, and then later they enter it in. So that's another way of doing it. It depends on the schedules of the schools.
This is just where to find those scoring rubrics for each item, for each tier. So Tier 1 is 6 through 11, Tier 2 is pages 12 through 16, and Tier 3 is 17 through 23 on that big, large PDF that we reviewed last time. All right, go ahead. When I sat down with my teams, like I said, I was meeting with both Tier 1 and Tier 2 coaches. I sat down with them. I opened that assessment window, and we completed as we went along. I provided them a hard copy of the assessment for each tier. We only did Tiers 1 and Tier 2. Some of my schools are Tier 3, but we're not in a good enough place to start going through the TFI to score it. The items were 0, 1, or 2, and we always scored lower when we were in doubt about where we should be scoring. All right, go ahead. On average, like I said, they took around that 45 to 60-minute piece to complete. None of my meetings went over 60 minutes. We were in the ballpark. We did the Tier 1 and Tier 2 rubrics. Then we reviewed the TFIs. The results, we were able to pull them up within minutes. And then from that, we developed our action plan with typically a 3-month window for that action plan.
So just because I'm sitting right next to Dave, I can actually ask him a real-time question here. So you were able to review the results right away. Is that because you closed the window as soon as you were done?
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Usually within 2 minutes of closing that window, I was able to hit refresh and those results were available. Okay, go ahead. The action plan piece, there are 2 action plans available. Option 1 is part of that large TFI PDF where everything else is coming from. It's on page 25 and 26. The other option is a DocX, which is available on the same spot where you get the large PDF, but it's just called Action Plan DocX. That's the one I used, mainly because the spaces were bigger to write in. But that, I don't care which one you use, it's more of a personal preference, but those are 2 options for you. Go ahead. For developing our action plan, we would choose one of the tiers, either Tier 1 or Tier 2, and then we would focus on 2 or 3 items, no more than 3, from that tier and create our action plan. As I said before, we had about a 3-month operational window, so when we met in that December time frame, we had all of our end dates projected out to March.
So I want to interject with that one again. Sorry.
It's all good. It's all fine.
He'll elbow me if he has a problem with it. But with teams that usually they can't get their Tier 1 and Tier 2 teams to meet together, it is okay if the Tier 1 team picks 1 or 2 items and the Tier 2 team picks 1 or 2 items, especially if they operate pretty much separately. It's not like the Tier 1 team can't work on anything because the Tier 2 team wants to work on something.
Right. Okay. So the follow-up, approximately 3 months afterwards, so that March, April window, I met with the teams again, basically the same format of sending out that email saying it's time to meet, let's meet, let's discuss our action plans. So that's what we did. So that was the follow-up meeting about 3 months later. Okay. At that, essentially, it was to look at those goal pieces. My teams fell into basically 3 categories. Either they met all their goals, they didn't meet any of their goals, or they met one but not another. So a little bit of each. So if they were able to meet those goals that they set, we simply sat down, we updated the TFI, and then we were able to set up a new action plan. Some stayed at the same tier, some jumped to the tier that they didn't focus on last time. So it all kind of depended on what their main focus was.
So if they got the same score, then you just kept it and they didn't re-enter.
So if they didn't meet their goal, their score didn't change, so I didn't log in and open a new window.
Okay.
We just left it as is. All right, go ahead. The goal not met, like I said, that was atypically, I didn't go in because their score wouldn't have changed, but it led to a discussion of did they make progress, and did they need any extra support or resources to meet that goal moving forward. A lot of my teams that didn't meet those goals, a lot of it came down to the time piece, or things were in progress but just weren't done yet, so we just continued those goals. All right, go ahead. And both, if they met a goal, we did go in and we reflected that within the TFI itself, so we'd open a window, update it, and then the piece that didn't get completed, we continue that on, and then we would choose another item to action plan around to put in place. So we always had at least 2 action plan pieces in place. And at that point, I didn't care if it was one tier 1 goal and a tier 2 goal. It was just so they're working on items altogether. Go ahead. In the spring when we met, we set everything out through September. So we were at that tail end of all those goals and getting those things in place. So that's kind of where we're at with what we did last year. Okay, go ahead. Is there more? All right. So my insights, based off all that, my coaches and my teams, they really liked the TFI. They liked how we were able to set specific action plans into place. And a lot of them were very excited at their initial meeting and how they were able to say, okay, this is what we're working on for the next 3 months. And it was very specific and very attainable for them. So that was, in my mind, very good. They were excited to use that data to move forward. All right, go ahead. Next. Oh, all right. Did we skip one? Yeah, my overall familiarity, the one that, there was one back there. My overall familiarity helped with it. So we didn't need to go back out and look around the building. I knew if the signage was there. I knew if there was visibility within the building because I'm in the buildings frequently. I attend team meetings, so I know what pieces they have in place, and you know, they said they had something in place and I didn't think they did. I was able to challenge them on it. So that helped with the overall speed, I think, of the meetings. If I was less familiar, may not have been able to be as quick. So that might be something to keep in mind.
So given that I'm right here with Dave, we can do this like a TV, radio, talk show thing. So I have a question. Did you have teams that if you hadn't been there, they wouldn't really have looked at the artifacts to see if, yeah, hey, we're not only doing this, but we can show that we did it?
There were times that I would, if they were like, yes, we have that in place, I could say, show me. And if they could, then we could move on. If not, they'd typically be able to say, oh, well, yeah, we can't find it right now. So I'd say, I'm going to score you lower because you cannot show it to me at this time. So whether it's on a jump drive or if it's in Google, or you know, if they're a team that's not all my teams should be sharing their meeting notes with me, but if they're not, I can say, I haven't seen any meeting notes this year. Please share them now. So I was able to say straight up, this is what I have, this is what I know is in place. If I don't know, show me. And if they couldn't, then we scored accordingly.
And then another question I have is, one of the things I see as a difference between the TFI and, say, the BOQ is the BOQ, you would have one question per item, whereas the TFI, it only has 15 items, say, for Tier 1, but there might be 3 or 4 parts to that question. So did you ever find your teams kind of glossing over, say, and not using that rubric the way it's meant to?
I think if I hadn't been sitting there and held them to it, it would have been very easy to gloss over. But if I said, if I'm going to give you a 2, and a 2 consists of this, show me this, show me this, show me this. And if they were able to do that piece by piece, then we would score a 2. A lot of them like, oh, we have this, but not this. So it was, in my mind, it was good to just that we could break it down specifically by item. And then from that, a lot of, like I said, when we were going through, they took notes on the hard copy I gave to them, and they were like, okay, we were missing this item. We can action plan around that.
Okay. So it seems to me like having someone outside the building who kind of holds your feet to the fire is really important.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay.
All right. You can go to the next slide. So this is what I'm doing right now. This is this school year. My school's just completed the SAS, and I am in the process of completing the walkthroughs for all 18 schools. So if anybody wants to come help out, you know, give me a call. And we're also going to be starting the TFI meetings probably starting next week. So at that time, what we'll do is we'll look at the SAS and the TFI results at the same time. So those meetings may take a little bit longer this time just because we're adding that extra component. But the SAS and the TFI, a lot of that work would be interrelated, so we can refine our work, narrow our work, make it more targeted. So that would put us at that whole December, January for quote-unquote round 2, and then March, April for round 3, and then that will put those out through the summer, and then we'll come back next year and do it all again. All right.
So let me see. Do we want to do a few questions now? I want to make sure that Rebecca gets to share her experience. Maybe if we could move to Rebecca and hold the questions and make sure that the questions are typed in, because if we don't have time and people need to leave, we'll address them when we have our next session. So if you do have questions, then please type them into the chat box.
Right, and I also put the Google document, so I can see there's 24 people attending, but I only have 16 people that actually have listed names in there, so there might be more people on. So if you haven't entered your name on that Google document, please do that. And then if you have any questions, put those in the chat as well. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute Rebecca and let her go ahead and start.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I am Rebecca Gerow. I'm an elementary school counselor in Crandon. I also serve as a behavior systems coach for PBIS and an internal coach for trauma-informed practices. This is our 6th year implementing PBIS at the universal level. We've been implementing Tier 2 for 4 years, and this is our 2nd year providing Tier 3 interventions. We've been trained in both complex FUBA, BIP, and RAP. So we took the TFI for the first time last winter. I reviewed all of the questions prior to taking the TFI to make sure that I understood what was being asked. Jen Greenke, our regional coordinator, was able to clarify any questions that I had. We then identified who would take the TFI. We decided that we would have 2 representatives from our Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 teams. Each tier basically has 2 leaders, so that is who we picked. I then reviewed the electronic files on our staff shared drive, which is where we store all of our behavior system information. I printed off copies of the necessary documents that were needed to complete the TFI. I asked the Tier 3 coordinator to print off all the behavior intervention plans. I put a paper copy of all the necessary documentation in one Crandon Elementary binder and had that available when we took the TFI as a team. We identified who would perform the walkthrough tool and provided the necessary information for completion, and then we scheduled the time to take the TFI. So the benefits of the TFI. I think the greatest benefit of the TFI is that it provides the walkthrough tool. This provides a great way to actually measure teacher and student knowledge of the school-wide expectations. It also provides a way to measure if staff are acknowledging positive behavior. Another benefit is that all tiers, as you know, can be measured with one tool. Scoring was way less time consuming than the BOQ. Because on the BOQ, the coach had to then go and score all the team member sheets to find the discrepancies. So it definitely was less time consuming. I also liked when it evaluated the discipline that it included policies and procedures that are proactive, restorative, and instructive. So I did like that piece. I kind of ran into a few challenges with the TFI. I feel that the TFI is an okay measure for evaluating a universal system that is already in place, but it doesn't offer any action steps to further guide the implementation process. So both the BOQ and the BAT provide action steps that specifically list what needs to be done for each component. And I have always been a big fan of the fidelity tools. They've guided basically everything that we've done here at Crandon. So I feel that the TFI alone does not do that. So then it made me think, even if schools are required to reach fidelity on the BOQ before taking the TFI, what about Tier 2 and Tier 3? So my concern is that if a school takes the TFI before reaching fidelity at Tier 2 and Tier 3, the TFI, being more of an evaluative tool, would not provide that team the necessary steps needed for implementation of Tier 2 and Tier 3. At least that's how I feel. So I hope that makes sense. So the TFI measures fidelity of the system, but it does not provide the how, like I feel the BOQ and the BAT do. Probably my biggest problem with the TFI is I feel that it completely fails to measure the classroom system. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But then finally, the value of the tool is really reliant on team member knowledge. So kind of like the previous guy said, he was there to kind of drill out what that really meant. So for example, it might show that you might show fidelity on the classroom system, but the problem is, how would you know what the components are to accurately judge that when the tool doesn't even identify what those components are? So people might be thinking they're doing something, but they really don't know what that is yet. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, can you give us a
yes,
specific
Rebecca.
example, Rebecca?
What's that?
Can you give a specific example, or is that going to come up?
Yeah, I kind of have a couple slides with just the classroom.
Okay.
So if I don't answer it, then feel free to ask.
Okay.
So this is the only question regarding the classroom system on the TFI. So in my opinion, the classroom is the single most important setting where PBIS implementation will make the biggest impact. So the TFI doesn't even identify the necessary components needed to establish solid classroom systems. As you can see, it just says Tier 1 features, and then in parentheses it says school-wide expectations, routines, acknowledgments, in-class continuum of consequences are implemented within classrooms and consistent with school-wide systems. That doesn't even come close to, it just names a few things, but it's just so vague, and that is very concerning to me. At our school, we have focused heavily on building solid classroom systems. We've identified non-negotiable classroom practices that are required in all classrooms. So examples of these practices, you know, we are required, they have to have an attention signal. They have to have posted routines with procedures. They have to have a classroom matrix. They have to have their classroom schedule posted. There's a lot of different things that they're required to do that, and the way we found those things is through the classroom management modules and the different self-reflection surveys that are part of those modules. That's how we identified what our non-negotiables were, and the TFI doesn't even say what they are, so I guess that is very concerning, where the BOQ does outline those components. So I just felt, because I feel so strongly with the classroom system, I just wanted to outline a few tips. When our universal team was first trained, the classroom system wasn't even part of the initial team training. I think I might be getting ahead of myself. Just one second. I'm not sure how many of you received that training on the components of the classroom system, but I know that it is now part of the universal training. But anyway, here are some tips that I thought would be useful. Spend some time building the knowledge of the internal coach and the universal team members so they truly understand that classroom component. They need to understand the importance of building strong classroom systems. I can't stress that enough. In addition to viewing the classroom management modules, I printed off the narrative from the modules and spent time reading and rereading them, and it's still one of my favorite go-to resources. At the PBIS conferences, I try to go to the different sectionals on classroom management, so just that ongoing professional development. Use the self-reflection checklists that are contained in each module to help identify what non-negotiable classroom practices you will require. Develop an action plan outlining how these essential features will be integrated into all classrooms. Show how the PBIS framework aligns with educator effectiveness, and have your administrator explain how these tools can be used as artifacts for their learning plans. That really helped here. Developing a classroom observation tool is one way you can do fidelity checks of the classroom system. Having these key components in place will assure you are identifying the right students who need additional support. So those were just some tips I wanted to share. I think we're on, oh yeah, TFI tips. So make sure that the TFI or the walkthrough tool is completed before the team meets to complete the TFI. I forgot to give our person a deadline, and it wasn't completed in time, so I definitely recommend giving a deadline. Review the questions prior to meeting with the team. If you have different coordinators at each tier, you could have them be responsible for collecting the artifacts needed. I collected them all myself. It was easier. I've been here since we implemented PBIS, so it was easier for me just to get them. Except for like the tier 3, the behavior intervention plans. I did have the tier 3 coordinator was responsible for bringing all of those. Make time to review the results and action plan with the corresponding team. Sorry, somebody's calling me. I highly recommend continuing to use the BOQ and BAT as resources to guide the implementation process. I'm fine with using the TFI and maybe having that be the only one we put in, but I'm still definitely going to use the action steps from the other tools to help continue to guide our team. If you only plan on using the TFI, I definitely would recommend finding a different tool to measure the classroom system, coming up with your own through the modules or through the self-reflection assessments, just something to ensure that you're doing everything that is needed within that classroom system. And then finally, just utilize your regional coordinators when you have questions. That was all I had.
Great.
That was great, Rebecca.
I especially like some of your observations on the classroom piece, because I was kind of dismayed the first time I looked it over too. And while they have the major categories, they really do not go into, well, exactly what does it mean if you have, you know, acknowledgement systems. And I think the BOQ does help with that.
I do too. I think a lot of people confuse that still with like a school-wide expectations, and they don't realize that you have a separate classroom matrix that is consistent with the school-wide, but that your rules and routines within the classroom are going to be different.
Yes. Yes. Very good. So we have a few minutes. So are there other questions that people have for either Dave or Rebecca?
Nothing was put in the chat, but if someone has any questions, they're welcome to raise their hand, which is on your go-to table off to the right, or you could put it in the chat and I can read it.
So one of the questions I have, and it actually has, and maybe Rebecca, your school is the one that did this, but I know that Jennifer worked with a school that created live binders for the artifacts. And maybe you could just say a little bit about that, because that seems to me to be a brilliant idea.
Well, we have a staff shared drive at our school, and so I have a behavior system folder, and since we started PBIS 6 years ago, we have a folder where everything is stored. So it's just nice, you know, if somebody wants to leave or whatever, at least all of our documentation is in one place.
Yeah, and I like what you said about that, because especially now that we're beginning to see schools that were trained like 5 or 6 years ago, they don't have the same staff. And some of the things that were developed, they no longer have access to because they left with the person who left the school. So this does kind of push people to have a common library of some of those, you know, I guess guiding documents or key documents that built the system.
Yep.
So there is a question they wanted to know, are there 2 walkthroughs and 3 meetings each school year when you're doing the TFI? And I don't know if Dave or Rebecca want to answer that.
I do one walkthrough per school per year, unless the results of the walkthrough don't meet the criteria or as good as the school expects, and part of their action plan is to, for example, increase students being able to state the school-wide expectations, and they asked me to come back and do a second walkthrough. So that's just one walkthrough, and then the initial meeting, and then the progress monitoring meetings every 3 months or so.
Okay, so that should answer that question. And that was the only one that was added to this. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands raised.
You want to show the resource slide?
Sure.
So one of the things that is on our website, if you type in that search box, it's that little white box close to the logo, yeah, where Jennifer has that arrow. You can type in TFI and it will pop up with this page that gives you access to just about everything that was discussed today. And you can also type in that little box, classroom management, and you will get the resource homepage for some of the things that Rebecca was talking about. There are checklists that are right on the main page when you get to classroom management. There's a checklist for routines and rules, there's a checklist for acknowledgement systems, and there's a checklist for consequence systems, and we actually added another module which I'm not going to go into right now, but those things are all on our Wisconsin PBIS network website.
And if you are having a problem locating any of those, contact your regional technical assistance coordinator and they can work with you to be able to find them, because sometimes it is a little harder if you're not used to the website.
That search box is your friend.
Yes, yes it is. So with that, I think we're good. We have no other questions. There's no hands raised.
Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us.
Yes. Bye, everyone.